I did a post-fight video earlier on Steve Cunningham versus Natu Visinia, a 10-0 Samoan heavyweight boxer who was pretty much destroyed by Steve Cunningham this weekend. He did score a knockdown against Cunningham, but apart from that, it was a bit of a weird knockdown. Apart from that, lost every round en route to retiring after the 7th round. It was a very entertaining fight. Steve Cunningham was pleasing to watch from a hardcore boxing perspective, um, as he was against Amir Mansour in their last fight, and as he was against Tyson Fury when those two fought. Now, it was that particular fight I wanted to talk about for a few minutes, because I believe it's quite a key piece of form ahead of Tyson Fury versus Chisora. It's that first fight, Tyson Fury versus Steve Cunningham, which was, I believe, April 2013, which was give or take around 18 months ago now. I wanted to talk about that and compare Tyson Fury to Steve Cunningham's opponent this weekend, Natu Visinia. Both of them are much bigger men than Steve Cunningham. Both of them are guys who tried to employ big man tactics against Cunningham, and I wanted to compare and contrast how they'd done and come to a sort of conclusion on how their attributes varied. Now, let me start off with, I believe this was a bad performance from Tyson Fury. He got dropped on the route to winning, but it was when he was without his trainer and key cornerman Peter Fury. I'd also say that Steve Cunningham's 38 now. That's very much in the autumn of his career. 18 months ago, that 18 months age is an important period of time, the difference between 36 and a half and 38, So I think that needs to be taken into account as well, possibly that Steve Cunningham may have got worse between his fight with Fury and his fight last weekend against Natu Visinia. So what I'm saying is, we've got a career poor performance from Tyson Fury against slightly younger, slightly fresher Steve Cunningham compared to this week's fight. And I wanted to compare and contrast along those lines. First things first, I think the way the fight starts is quite similar, with the big man taking the centre of the ring, Cunningham sort of circling, using movement, trying to sort of box on his back foot, trying to, throw a jab, move. I think the difference between the two, and again I appreciate this came later in Fury's career, he'd had more sort of high level experience than Visinia, but nonetheless the difference between the two is from the offset Fury got to work with a jab, and not just a jab, but often a double jab, often a triple jab. He would regularly throw sort of crosses, straight rights, working off the jab. His jab was accurate. His jab had bite to it. His jab, you can see, hitting Steve Cunningham in the face area. This particular punch in the second round after Fury's been dropped, where he throws, I think it's a double jab right hand. It's the same combination that we see him drop Joey Abel with in a later fight, and it's a real weapon from Fury. Now, I appreciate that Natu Visinia doesn't have Fury's pedigree, his experience, and even though he's a very big man, probably doesn't have Fury's range, but what we saw from Visinia, and why Visinia will never be a top sort of 20-30 heavyweight, is a guy who was very one-paced, very route one, plodding forward, no side-to-side lateral movement, just straight down the line. He wasn't able to move dynamically, wasn't light on his feet, came forward. In terms of combination punching, working off a jab, it was minimal. There was a lot more sort of barroom brawl style tactics in the early round. Often we saw Visinia try and get the fight inside, and when it was inside, sort of throw looping hooks that were wildly inaccurate at times. Steve Cunningham was able to evade, use head movement, use foot movement to sort of make sure he wasn't in the firing line of any of those shots. Now with Fury, he takes a different route. He takes a more classic big man route of trying to fight on the outside, trying to throw a jab, trying to work his way in that way. And he does well. He wins the first round. We know with Tyson Fury, he does have the propensity to be open to that overhand right. I think it was Nevin Piketts who dropped him in an earlier fight with an overhand right as well. So he's got to learn from that. But what Tyson Fury was able to do in this fight was nullify the best of Steve Cunningham. If you look at Steve Cunningham versus Natu Vicenia, at times Steve Cunningham looks like a Floyd Mayweather type heavyweight. He's able to sort of slip punches, jump out the corner under Vicenia. He's able to pepper him with combinations, hit and not be hit. His jab looks electric. Against Fury, whilst I will admit Cunningham had spells of success, you didn't see that. Fury's jab was faster, it was more accurate, it had more snap to it. It really, really was a weapon in this fight. Fury himself offered more than Vicenia. Vicenia just tried to plod in and land haymakers inside. Fury could fight on the outside. He was then happy to use big man tactics later on in the fight and fight on the inside. Vicenia, for all his sort of size and reputation as a puncher, he didn't seem to be able to land a killer blow that Fury landed. And again, I know there was some controversy to how that fight ended. I know Fury arguably was borderline, at least, with the how he pushed Cunningham's head up before landing the right hand that ended that fight. So my point is that Fury again showed in that fight that he has power. Now the other thing, and I know this is a slightly bizarre one given that Fury was dropped whereas Vicenia wasn't, but besides a moment of madness, Fury on the whole showed better defence. He was able to sort of use his long levers and big stance to kind of be out of the way, and at times Cunningham was missing and swinging wildly in a very similar manner to how Vicenia was in their fight. Fury was able to fight on his back foot, use head movement, pull his head back away from shots, and at time made Cunningham miss wildly. As I say, I know Fury did get dropped, and that was obviously a moment of madness, but on the whole, Fury's footwork, Fury's movement was enough to sort of keep himself clean defensively. And I think what Fury showed, in addition to his jab, in addition to his power, in addition to his movement, he just had sort of speed, class to his work. He looked like somebody who could fight on the inside and the outside. He looked a better fighter offensively than Vicenia, in my opinion, although I know it's debatable, a better fighter defensively. And he was much more dynamic, much more different strings to his game than we saw from a one-paced, flat-footed Natu Vicenia this weekend. Now, I appreciate that Fury is a world-ranked heavyweight, whereas Vicenia isn't, so we would expect, Fury to do well comparatively. But this isn't the only time Fury's shown these attributes. If you look at two other key pieces of form, Fury versus Kevin Johnson and Fury versus Derek Chisora 1, all these attributes, again are, clear. The jab and the movement is evident in both of those fights. Kevin Johnson, I know fans didn't like that fight. Fury got booed there. I thought it was probably his best performance. You must remember, this is Johnson before he'd lost to Chisora, before he'd lost to Christian Hamer. This was a Johnson who I think he'd only lost at the time to Klitschko, Tor Hamer, and maybe once more earlier on in his career. So this was a slightly more impressive Kevin Johnson. And Fury dominated that fight, pretty much whitewashed him, was able to completely nullify Kevin Johnson and use real good boxing technique. which again was in evidence in the Chisora fight, where he was able to use a jab, a movement, and dominate that fight. And I think that's what I like about Fury in the Cunningham fight, because we know Fury's a 6'9" guy with a jab, with movement. You know, we know he can fight on the outside. But in the Cunningham fight, he showed a sort of grit and desire to win. You know, to fight on the inside as well, to use big man tactics, to rough his opponent up, to lean on him. I know at times it wasn't pretty to watch. I know at times it was, you know, borderline compared to the rules, but it was effective, and you can't deny that, having seen Steve Cunningham, a man who'd never been stopped. And this is a guy who's still not been stopped other than Fury. He's been in with big heavyweights like Amir Mansour, Natu Visinia, and no one's been able to stop him. And we saw him sprawl out for the count against Tyson Fury. I think Tyson Fury is open to an overhand right, has room for improvement in his defence, but we must remember how young he is. I think he was 23 when he fought Chisora. He's still very, very green for a heavyweight, especially someone who's 6'9", and for such a big man it does take a while to grow into your build. But I think he has got so many attributes, and to me there isn't a heavyweight out there that has the combination of movement, size, inside and outside game. Yes, Vladimir Klitschko's jab is probably better. He probably hits harder than Fury. But what Fury has is other attributes. Fury can work the body, whereas sometimes Klitschko will go a whole fight without throwing a body punch. Klitschko has got this holding tactic to avoid working on the inside, whereas Fury has that in his game. If Derek Chisora gets inside with Fury, it's not going to be a one-sided contest. Fury can go on the inside. Fury isn't the sort of the best jabber, he isn't the best mover, he isn't the hardest puncher, he probably isn't even the best inside. But what he is in my book is a solid 8 out of 10, if not 9 out of 10, in all those areas for a heavyweight. And I think that's why, if he could work on his defence, if he could be slightly less hittable, he's a lot more of a complete fighter than most of the top 10 heavyweights. I appreciate contrasting him to Natu Visinia is not good enough, but I think how many times have we seen a fighter like Povetkin, like Chisora, like Leopai, a shorter guy going against Klitschko and just get dominated, just get their head taken off with the jab, have their inside game closed down. Well, Fury would offer something different. A 6'9" guy who can jab, who can come forward, who can fight on the back foot, who's happy to get stuck in inside, he's happy to fight from range. I think Fury is a real risk to Klitschko. I'm not saying Fury definitely beats Klitschko, but I think he asks different questions, which creates a more competitive fight than any other heavyweight out there at the minute. I'm interested to hear people's thoughts. Thanks for watching.